Yeah, so we're live. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Journeys in Quantum Computing panel. We're very happy to have Dr. Olivia Lanes, Balint Pato, and Maria Mihailov I'm sorry, in our panel today. Maria is from Microsoft, Olivia is from IBM, and Balint is from Google, and they will be talking about their journeys in quantum computing. Um, so we will start with some brief introductions, and then each of our presenters will have some time to talk about their own experiences, and then we'll take some questions, so feel free to drop those on Twitch. So Dr. Olivia Lanes is a recent PhD graduate in physics from the University of Pittsburgh. She did her degree on experimental quantum computing, focusing on superconducting qubit readout and amplification. And she's currently working at IBM as an experimental researcher and hardware community developer in education. Balint Pato is a senior software engineer on the Google Quantum AI team with 15 years of software engineering experience. He got his BS in computer science from ELTE in Budapest, Hungary, and he joined Google in 2017 and the Quantum AI team in 2020. And Maria Mihailova is a senior software engineer on the Microsoft Quantum Systems team. She's the original author and maintainer of the Quantum Katas project, an open source collection of hands-on tutorials and programming exercises for learning quantum computing. So definitely check those out, especially on our Discord. So with that, Olivia, why don't you start with your part of the presentation?
Sure, thanks. And thanks so much for that introduction. All right, trying to share my screen again. Okay, so like I was telling you, I have a couple slides, but some are just pictures, so I don't think it'll take too long. So hi, my name is Olivia Lanes. I am an education developer and a researcher at IBM Quantum, and I'm an experimentalist. And this talk is basically just a short summary of my journey in quantum and how I got to the position where I am today. So the first part, or part 0, is just getting to the right place at the right time. So this is sort of a silly timeline of my life. I was born in Boston, Massachusetts, 1992. Not a lot happened for a really long period of time that anyone would really care about. And then I took high school physics, and I was pretty good at it. I watched Cosmos DVDs. That was really like my window into physics at the very beginning. And I decided I basically wanted to be Carl Sagan and become a science communicator and translate, scientific topics to the masses. So I went to Dickinson College for my undergrad, and I studied physics and astronomy. Dickinson's a really, really small school, but I went there so that I could focus on doing astrophysics because I thought I was going to be an astronomer or an astrophysicist for a really long time. I took a couple different courses. I did 2 REUs in biophysics and astronomy just to make sure I was in the field of physics that I really wanted to be in. I made a Twitter account. That part is important for later. I went on my first observing run the end of my junior year, and I realized that I actually did not love astronomy, and it was not as glamorous as I had theorized it would be. Anyway, for some people, they love it. I didn't love it, so I decided that I was just going to settle and I was going to get a degree in it and go to graduate school in it. And I just wasn't going to love my job. And that's fine because some people just don't love their job. But I started applying to graduate schools around this time. And I found out about quantum computing and quantum cryptography, which was actually the first word that sort of caught my interest because when I was a kid, I was a little weird. I was really into code breaking for some reason. And I'd always really loved quantum mechanics when I took it in college. And I thought, oh, cryptography, code breaking, quantum. I did not know that these 2 words went together. So I became interested in it from seeing those words just on applications. And I decided essentially at that point to just click on them and apply to graduate school in quantum computing, even though I did not really know what it entailed up until that point. So it was really a leap of faith. So I went to graduate school. And to get a PhD in quantum computing, I went to the University of Pittsburgh, like I said, and I went there to work with my specific advisor. And I wanted to work with him, Michael Harridge, because he was starting a brand new lab from scratch. And I thought that this would be the coolest opportunity to get to build a lab from nothing. So this is what the lab looked like when I joined. Actually, there weren't even tables and chairs when I joined. Those came a week later. But as you can see, there's really no scientific equipment to be seen. Eventually, we got a dilution refrigerator, but we didn't know how to use it. That's my good friend, my lab mate, just kind of shrugging his shoulders. We didn't know how to use any of this equipment. We really started from nothing. So we learned how to do a lot of interesting types of work to build that lab, such as electrical work and plumbing. Did not know that that came with being an experimental physicist, but it does. And this is just a funny joke. This is a drawer of what we called the plumbing drawer of shame. These are all the plumbing parts that I bought that don't fit with any other parts in the lab, and you can't return them. So they just exist in this drawer forever, I guess. But eventually we got better at it, and we were able to build, and I actually cabled and wired our first dilution refrigerator, which is where the quantum processors and all the chips that we made went. So that was my first project in graduate school, was to cable this by hand. And that was, a really incredible learning experience. And that's what the lab looked like today. I assume I haven't been back since the pandemic, and I have since graduated, but that's what it looked like the last time I was there. So you can see we really came a long way from just some tables and chairs to a fully functioning experimental physics lab. And along the way, the field of quantum computing evolved as well, even before me. I know that's shocking. So 40 years ago, there was the first big conference on the physics of computation. I don't have to go into all these details, but a lot of really important discoveries were made over the past 40 years, just highlighting some specific ones here. A really important one in 2016 is that IBM decided to put the first quantum computer on the cloud so that it would be more accessible, so that people could start their quantum education earlier and not have to go through all of that lab building and cabling and wiring their own personal quantum computer in order to learn how to use one, which I highly recommend, because that was a very long process. So yeah, like I said, a lot is open source online. You can start your education right now. You don't have to have your own dilution refrigerator in your own personal laboratory. So this leads me to part 2, which is how can one get involved? Well, I went to graduate school, right? So this is my personal journey. So I can't pretend that I did something I didn't. But so we built a lab. If you like arguing over confusing data, if you like building questionable battery sources, fixing leaky gas lines, getting stuck in elevators, staying really late, graduate school might be for you. Obviously, it's super challenging. It's not everyone's cup of tea. I don't regret it. I had a good time. I learned a lot, and it made me have the skills that I have today in order to be successful in my job. But you don't necessarily need to do what I did. This is just my experience. So my experience is, you go to graduate school, and number one, you work very hard. And that's a picture of me working very hard. It's actually not, I'm taking a nap there, but I'm just kidding. I did work very hard. This is a picture of me in the clean room where I was 5 to 6 days, a week, Saturdays and Sundays. It didn't really matter. I had to do a lot of work, right? So you have to sort of make a name for yourself in the field while you're in graduate school, publish, go to lots of conferences, present your new material, your new work. I highly recommend going to hackathons, meetups, anything really, to sort of get your name out there and get people thinking like, oh, I know somebody who works on this. And then they think of you. I highly recommend networking. Making a Twitter, I think, is a great idea. Making a LinkedIn, it's a really good idea to do those types of things to get an idea of who is working in the field, who you might want to connect with, and even figure out subjects and things that people are working on that you wouldn't have any idea otherwise, right? That's just a picture of my Twitter. Right. And then, you apply and you interview for a wide range of positions. I interviewed at IBM. I interviewed for academic positions, consulting positions. So I went to, basically everything I can find. And then you interview there and you promise these people that you're interviewing with that you're going to finish your PhD relatively shortly. And then you actually do that at some point. So this is a picture of me graduating and finishing my degree last summer. Like I said, though, you don't necessarily have to do what I did. I think it's really helpful if you're interested in being an experimentalist, if you like, working with your hands and putting things together. I think getting an experimental degree is really important to gain those sorts of skills. But if you're interested in computer science and development and theoretical programming, you don't necessarily have to do what I did. Computer science is your friend. Computer science is really important. Classical computer science is really important to quantum computing. So you can't really have one without the other. So definitely coming in from that angle is totally valid. And that's because quantum computing is incredibly interdisciplinary. And so you can see these are just some highlights of just a few job postings from IBM's website that I pulled today. And you can see they're kind of all across the board. You don't necessarily have to have a PhD. Really quick, just wanted to mention, I would be amiss if I did not say that we feel that, the field is not necessarily as diverse as it could be right now, but these are just highlighting a few women and a few other people in the field who I consider role models. So, this could be you. We have Michelle Simmons, Hani Pike, just a couple to name a few who are really prominent female researchers in the field who I look up to. And it's hard to say exactly what the quantum future is going to look like, right? We are doing so much at the same time. We don't know necessarily what the most exciting application is going to be right now. And probably we don't even have any idea. And that's sort of what makes it the most exciting thing, right? And that's kind of how it works in technology sometimes. So I'm just going to wrap up really quick. So the takeaways from this short little rant is that quantum computing is awesome. Everyone has a plumbing drawer of shame. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. I made a million. It's really hard to give general advice because I think everyone's personal story is so different. But I think more important than learning how to get into quantum computing is how to learn skills that you can apply to things that you will enjoy. And these skills are more universal than you would think. So I think grit is a really, really great indicator of success, and you can always build upon this. I think learning public speaking skills is really important. You can get that just from practicing. For me, I over prepare, and I think that this is one of my, more useful skills. Maybe it comes from a place of nervousness or anxiety, I don't know. But I anticipate as much as I can, and I think that really helps me. And always avoid jargon. Try to be as clear as you can. I think when talking to any sort of audience, I don't think experts are going to look down on you because you are clear, right? So I don't think you have to use jargon. I don't think you have to sound like you are, the number one expert in your field all the time. You just want to make sure that people understand what you're saying and why what you do is important. And lastly, I think a sense of humor is always really good. It's always important to understand that what you're doing is not the be all end all. Sometimes experiments fail. That's fine. That's how life works. That's how science works. So yeah, that's all I have for right now. And I'm looking forward to answering any questions you guys have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Olivia. How about we move on to our next speaker, who is Maria?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for the introduction, Katerina, and wow, cool talk, Olivia, and it definitely shows that you have actually prepared for this panel. I'm nowhere near as organized as Olivia, so I'm just going to try and remember what my journey to quantum computing was like without any supplementary materials. Let's see. I'm originally from Ukraine, so I got my master's degree there. It was applied math, applied informatics, which translates to a mix of math, computer science, and surprisingly physics. I'm not a huge fan of physics, so basically I graduated and tried to forget everything I learned as soon as possible. And my journey to quantum computing was actually not very straightforward. It took a couple of detours. After I graduated, I worked in banking software industry in Ukraine for way more years than I care to admit. And let me tell you, banking software industry in Ukraine is a scary place to be. Just one thing to give you an idea of how scary it is exactly. I worked in 2 companies there. Neither of them used version control. Just let this sink a little bit. I started using version control when I moved to US and joined Microsoft. That was a life-changing discovery. But yeah, this tells you something about my early years. Meanwhile, I had to do something fun with my life because, well, working on banking software and nothing else is just not that mentally stimulating, at least for me. So I went into programming competitions. I actually started participating in programming competitions back in high school and then a little bit in university. But then I discovered a completely new part of it. It's not only that you can participate in programming competitions, you can also organize them, you can write problems for them, and it's so much more interesting than just participating, because suddenly you have impact on this fascinating area. So I started writing problems for programming competitions, did it on and off until, well, actually until current days. The last competition I prepared was less than a month ago. Okay, so these two parallel timelines. At some point around 9 years ago, I interviewed for Microsoft and I got in. I was very lucky because this was the last year you could get an H-1B visa to move to US without going through the lottery. After that, getting H-1B became just trickier. Microsoft started to use different approaches to hiring, but I got in just in time. So 8.5 years ago, I moved to US and joined Microsoft, but it's still not the beginning of my quantum computing story. Originally, I joined Microsoft to work on cloud infrastructure inside Azure and various parts of it that are more or less open to the broad public. That's how I spent about 4 years. And then I started looking for a new adventure. Again, something more exciting, something to maybe apply some of the math that I learned in the university. And this is actually when my quantum computing journey starts, because a friend of mine who is a proper quantum computing PhD and researcher was working in our team before me. And he told me that our team is looking for software engineers without quantum computing experience to join the team and to work on the compiler for a quantum programming language. I decided that this sounds adventurous enough. At that point, I didn't know anything about quantum computing. But it sounded adventurous, so I gave it a try, got in, started learning quantum computing. What it looked like was not quite what it looks like these days. That was 4 years ago, a bit more. So basically, upon joining, every new person got Nielsen and Schwang book, and basically, good luck. We also got some introductory lectures from our researchers, but like actual practice was more scarce, harder to come by. For the first year in the team, I worked on the quantum development kit. Well, first on some prototypes and then on what actually became it. We released it in December 2017, and we started planning the next things we are going to do there. New components to add to the compiler, new features, these kind of things. At the same time, I looked at what we are seeing in terms of usage of quantum development kit, like what people try to do with it. And I noticed this gap that a lot of people are enthusiastic about it, many more people than we expected, but they just don't know what to do with it. They download it, they try to run a sample or two, and then, well, obviously there is this gap between being able to download something and install it and being able to do something interesting with it. Most people just don't know how to start doing something interesting with quantum computing. So I came up with this idea. Why don't we do some programming exercises to help people start learning quantum computing. And most interesting thing, we will be able to do them in a way that once you do the programming exercise, you get feedback immediately. You know whether you solved it correctly or not, right? Because when you're learning quantum computing, when you're learning anything really, you need to know how you're doing. And well, during the first year of my learning quantum computing, I mostly relied on our experts, and that looked as I would lay a trap in our kitchen on the floor in our office. And whenever an unsuspecting researcher would wander by, I would ambush them saying, I think you know quantum computing. I have this little question for you. This is not really scalable, and this is not really accessible for somebody who doesn't have a place to ambush a quantum computing researcher, right? So something that would be able to give people feedback on their work automatically was basically a very good idea. And that's actually how I came up with my job that I'm doing right now. Because right now I'm working on education and outreach. That idea that I had, I did it, and it is my very favorite project, Quantum Hackathons. I'm going to be very rude and actually share a link to it, assuming, yes, I am a moderator this time. At the same time, I figured out that if we're doing those exercises anyways, we can as well host a programming competition using them, right? So we started by using those tasks in a programming competition, the first C# coding contest, 2018. And then we published them as self-paced exercises. And then, step by step, I gravitated from more compiler work to education and outreach work. Unsurprisingly, there is a growing demand there. So I did a lot of interesting stuff there over the time. So on education side, the most interesting things I did was participating in our team effort to teach a course on quantum computing at University of Washington a couple of years ago. We did this course very focused on practical aspects of quantum computing and quantum programming. So we had less theory emphasis and more practice, programming assignments, final projects. It was a very interesting experience. And then a year later, I taught a class myself at Northeastern University. Even more emphasis on programming, also very interesting personal experience. I didn't have any experience as a teaching assistant or any teaching before, so it was my first. On the outreach side of things, I keep doing programming competitions. I love things like hackathons. We did a couple of internal hackathons, participated in Hacktoberfest last fall. I'm, well, the driving force behind the C# developer blog. Well, I'm probably not exactly the driving force behind it because like half of the posts are written by me, which means I'm more of a workhorse than the driving force. We did a fun event series called Advent Calendars, C# Advent Calendars, in which in December, every community, well, some community members would write blog posts every day about C#, about some projects they did with it. I think it's pretty fun reading. So if you want to check out what I'm doing there, another link. And I also do a lot of open source work, both on the quantum katas itself and helping our other repos kind of do it the right way. What else? Yeah, I think that's more or less it, and I'm probably a couple minutes over my time limit, sorry. So that's it, and I'll answer your questions later in the session.
This is amazing. Thank you so much, Maria. Valen, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Let me share my screen. And thank you very much for both of you. This is very inspiring to see two very different journeys. And let me just find, okay, this is it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Excellent. So I did put together some slides, not as well prepared as Olivia, but hopefully this will be inspiring to some of you, and I'm happy to answer questions as well later, of course. So I'm going to start from before my quantum computing journey and how I got there, because I do think that there's some conclusions that I can draw from that might be useful for other people as well. So my story starts in Hungary. I was born and raised in a town called Székesfehérvár. And after high school, I left Budapest to start my studies in chemistry. But let me pause a little bit in high school. So in high school, oh yes, and I was in high school much earlier than probably anyone on this call. So I was interested in 1,000 things, music, chemistry, math, languages, programming, athletics, volleyball, and participated in all sorts of competitions. I wasn't the best in all of them, but I enjoyed learning and was relatively good at picking up new things. I didn't really feel the need to decide, but I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. I was interested in way too many things. One year, I learned about the Hungarian Research Student Association, which is a fantastic organization and community of students and mentors from academia that allows high school students to participate in actual research projects. I started working on a biochemistry project with Professor Peter Csermely from Semmelweis Medical University. This resulted in my highest contest achievement. I received an award of second place on a European level contest and an award to participate in 2001 on the Nobel Prize ceremonies. So that was very inspiring. This is a picture of me with Swedish Princess Victoria a couple of days before the actual ceremony. So this led a straight path for me to become a chemistry major at ELTE in Budapest. However, in the meantime, I also had a band. As I mentioned, I was interested in music as well. And then I also realized that I don't really like chemistry that much. So I decided that I will become a rock star. So I dropped out of school of chemistry, and I kept searching for what I wanted to do as a musician. We did not make enough for a living, so I started to work as a software engineer. Back then, you could do that without a degree, and I enjoyed it a lot. The creativity to model business requirements and create maintainable designs, the puzzles you need to solve, the bugs you need to fix. So when the band fell apart in 4 years, I decided to go back to school and become a software engineer for real. So I was definitely a better software engineer than musician. I got my bachelor's degree in computer science from ELTE as well, while I was working as a freelance coder and smaller companies. So that got me an opportunity to also work outside of Hungary. So I moved to the UK for a couple of years. That's where I started to work in finance. Actually, similarly to Maria, although we did have version control in that bank where I worked. I also remember how quickly I realized that so that is when I first heard about quantum computing. And so I remember thinking, this will be just another programming language, right? I also remember like how quickly I realized that this is not the case. My first book was that I was reading from quantum computing, the Quantum Computing for Computer Scientists. I started to work through it, but I didn't get too far. I didn't get what observables are. I also had a lot happening in my life. I was very active in the software craftsmanship community. which is a meetup, where I learned a lot about test-driven development, good maintainable software design, and I started to like give workshops myself as well. But I also wanted to leave London because the weather got to me. So I decided to move to New York, where I founded another meetup, a software craftsmanship meetup. I met my future wife and got married. I found and started and attended the quantum computing meetup. So I kept like looking at quantum computing more and more in my free time. My wife started to call quantum computing my mistress. And I started to get worried that finance is not going to be my direction. And I decided to apply for a job at Google. So in 2017, after like 3 months of hard learning and interview preparation, I learned the game, played the game, and I got lucky. And I got in, and I was super happy to work at a company that allowed me to work in open source, as well as potentially collaborate with the quantum team eventually. I was working in cloud, again, similar to Maria. I was working in cloud native computing and tools around developer productivity. And I was, honestly, I still think that Google is the best place I ever worked at. I met a ton of brilliant and kind people, and I keep learning every single day. A year later, for personal reasons, we decided to move to California. I switched projects and started to lead an open source project in the Kubernetes space. It was a completely new language, new team, challenging, but highly enjoyable and impactful. We built a community of contributors and brought an early stage product into a mature one in the space. In the meantime, I was casually taking edX and Coursera classes when I could. I enabled videos and blog posts. I continued in quantum computing. But by the end of 2018, I decided to give quantum computing another serious go. I sat down and went through the first couple of chapters of Mike and Ike and solved the exercises one by one. Now, that really helped. Maybe it was that it was the second or third or fourth time seeing things, but things finally started to click. So I decided to explore the field more consciously. So I went to the 2019 QIP conference in Boulder. Most of the talks went above my head, but still today, but I found it still incredibly interesting and useful. Hearing experts talk about the field starts to create familiarity with the language, the concepts, and you can start to get the high level picture. I met the Google team there, the Google Quantum AI team, chatted with Greg Gidney and others, and decided to start working with them on a 20% basis. You can do that at Google. You can collaborate with teams or do personal projects on 20% of your time. So that's how I got into Circ. I worked hard on a bunch of projects, 3-qubit decomposition and other things. And I contributed the ability to import OpenChasm into Circ. And mostly because my background is in managing open source projects, in a bit more than a year, I managed to join the Quantum AI team as the lead for open source projects, as Craig Gidney became a full-time researcher, which is a story for him to tell one day how he became a software engineer, from a software engineer, a researcher. So this was last summer. And then since then, I've been working in open source help dev, in Open Fermion and TensorFlow Quantum and QSIM and the website building and everything, and Circ mostly. And so in 2020, well, at the moment, I'm here at QC Hack, giving a presentation of my journey, gave my first presentation on Circ, and put together the first challenge for Google Quantum AI, which, by the way, is approved now. So we will have it tomorrow. And who knows what comes beyond. One thing for sure, I feel home in quantum computing. It is a great, challenging, risky field with a ton of potential and a great community. And then a couple of takeaways. Communities are awesome. I learned a lot and felt home and had the opportunities to contribute back and got opportunities to move forward in my career at every stage in my life. Open source is awesome. again, for learning to build connection with the best teams in the industry, maybe Qiskit, Circ, the Microsoft SDK. You can build up a portfolio and show it, show that you actually delivered interesting things, build a relationship with these people, get your name out there. A bachelor can be enough to get a job in quantum computing, as my journey proves. Although if you want to be a researcher, obviously you will need to do more. Yeah, experiment with multiple sources for learning. There's no single thing that works for everyone. For me, the combination of different books, open source contributions, and videos and courses did the job. I really needed to hear from different sources multiple times the same thing, and that's how it started to click. And that's it.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for your amazing stories and all the resources you shared. We will now move on to the part of the panel where it's open to questions. So we have some questions submitted by people already, and we will also be taking questions from the chat. So feel free to post all of your questions on the chat on Twitch. So one question that a lot of people are interested in learning more about is, and you all touched upon it a bit, but how do you think people can enter the field of quantum computing, and whether it is for software or hardware? And should they only depend on that field as it is an emerging technology, or should they also have other plans? And whoever has an answer could give their perspective.
I'm pretty sure all of us have answers. I'll be rude and go first. Okay, so how to enter the field? I was one of the first software engineers without quantum computing background in our team. So I had a lot of opportunity to see how we are hiring these people. And I'm talking only about software here. I have no idea how we're hiring hardware people. They allowed me inside a lab twice, once before it had anything in it, and second time on a tour. And let's just say they watched to make sure I didn't touch anything. So, software. The cool thing about quantum computing software right now is that it spans a lot of different topics. So you don't need to have experience in actual quantum computing to do something useful in this area. So if you have experience in, for example, compiler development, if you have experience in, I don't know, physical simulation, things like even having experience in open source and in learning quickly, all these things can help you a lot. So I have seen us hire a person who had an internship with us. She had an internship before she even finished her bachelor. And then she finished the bachelor half a year later. We hired her because we were just happy with her. She, as far as I remember, she didn't have physics background, so just she's learning as she goes, but we saw the potential, so we grabbed her. I saw people join our hackathons, again, work with us on a project. We see that they have the kind of software engineering approach we like, we hire them. I always highly recommend open source because it's a valuable practical skill no matter what you end up doing. Even if you don't end up doing quantum computing, it's a good skill to have. And because it helps you get familiar with the team, if you're working on some issues in their repo, and usually repos have some good first issues to help you get started, you start talking to those people, they know you, they know you're a reasonable person and you actually know how to code and you can finish what you promised to finish. that kind of things are really good. Internships, of course, but internships are very competitive. I'm sure in all companies there are a lot more applications than there are actual positions, so those can be harder to get.
Yes, to follow up on that, Maria, you mentioned people that you hire people after internships once you realize that they have some qualities that you're looking for. What are some of the things that employers are looking for? And again, this is addressed to both Maria and to our other panelists.
So just things like being a good software engineer, just having a healthy approach to software engineering, things like testing, like thinking what you're doing, planning, being a reasonable human being, listening to what others say, being able to have a conversation with other people. Those are very simple things and have nothing to do with quantum computing, I promise you. But they make for much better experience working with you than if you lack them, obviously.
Agreed. I just want to second most of the things that Maria said. That so in our team as well, there are a lot of software engineers who might have actually, there are people like, for example, like me, who were hired as software engineers who didn't have physics or quantum computing background, but they were very interested and motivated. At Google, we actually had this notion of 20% thing, so that was a way of collaborating with the team, but it's actually very similar to open source contributions. So internships are also a direction in our case as well. And yeah, I think that the qualities that you listed, like good, healthy, maintainable code that you write and care about, if you have a good personality to work with, is what all matters. And then everybody's learning quantum computing as we go. So it's and we have experts on the team, and we are surrounded by experts who will help if there are questions and deep questions. There are a ton of software engineering that needs to be done that is not necessarily specific to the quantum computing logic in itself. So yeah.
Maybe I can address the second part of the question that you asked, because I think they did a really good job already with the first part about just getting started. But I think your second question was about, should people narrow themselves into quantum computing too much, right? I think, yeah. So, I mean, I would not do that. I would caution against that. I think quantum computing is really hot right now. I think it's really fun. It's exciting to work in this field, but there are lots of different opportunities in tech that's fun and exciting. And, you know, I think the best thing you can do is to find specific skills that you enjoy doing and then apply that to what you think would be best at the time. You know, I think saying I want to work in quantum computing because there are jobs in quantum computing right now might not be the best strategy, because none of us know what's going to happen, right? I mean, we all think there are going to be lots of jobs in this field, but none of us can predict the future. I think it's a much safer bet to say, you know, I like working with my hands. I want to get a degree as an engineer, or I like programming. I want to focus on, you know, this type of programming development. I think that's a much safer bet and probably better for your long-term happiness than to be like, I am going to get a job in quantum computing no matter what. That's my 2 cents.
On another note, and that's a different question submitted for this panel, what does diversity look like in this field, and especially in comparison to other fields like CS, physics, and other STEM fields?
Well, I'm here, Olivia's here. That's diverse, right? Also, I just noticed that somebody in the chat asked Balint whether his wife understands what he's doing for a living, but nobody asked me whether my husband understands what I'm doing. It looks like there is some bias in action.
Yeah, In terms of diversity, I think that the field could do better. There are a lot of white men as the dominant like part of the industry. I've recently participated in a quantum computing diversity conference. It was just a one-day event. It was great to hear everybody. I was just listening in. But I think that there are a lot of people who are recognizing this as a problem and are working hard to not make the same mistake that was done with classical computing. That was a very, very non-diverse set of people who created classical computing in the early 20th century. And this should be the second kind of computing revolution should be a much more colorful and diverse people who create it. So I think that the start wasn't the greatest, but I think that there's good hope that it will be much more diverse than it is now. At least I'm hoping. And yeah, my wife doesn't understand fully what I'm doing, but yeah, she gets bits and bobs as I explain them. But then, yeah, she's still fully supportive of everything what I do. So in the end, yeah, she enjoys all the fact that I'm a nerd, and then she's doing all the cool stuff in nonprofits and different other things. Yeah.
So how do you all communicate your passion and your ideas either to your families, loved ones, friends, or to a non-STEM audience?
I mean, I think the first thing that I like to do whenever I'm doing some type of science communication is engage the audience and tell them why they should care. And that can vary depending on who your audience is. If it's like my family, why should they care? I mean, I don't know, I guess it's easier because they care about me. So I like to talk about the things that I'm interested in, and they at least humor me and pretend like they also are interested in it. But I mean, I think it's cool. I think you can find aspects of it that are just universally interesting because it is about the way the world and nature fundamentally works. So it's not too hard to convince people why they should care, in my experience. But you know, the level at which you explain things can be different depending on who your audience is.
Another question submitted by our participants is, what are some of the challenges you faced coming into the field or being in the field of quantum computing, and how did you deal with those challenges?
One of the hardest things for me is that, which is kind of the fun part as well, that there's always every day some kind of question that comes up that shows that I need to learn more. And the way I'm just dealing with it is I put a lot of time in on my free time as well to read and educate myself and practice things.
Yeah, just to sort of second that, I mean, I think one of the challenging things about quantum computing is that there's so much to learn and there are so many aspects of it, right? Like there are algorithms, software, there's theoretical work, experimental work, like it's huge. And there are so many papers being published right now. It can be hard to know what are the most important papers to read, where you should be looking for certain information. So, I mean, I think the only real solution in that case is to just accept that you can't read all of those papers and you literally cannot be a world expert in all of those things. But to know who you can go to learn the information that you need. So I know that there are specific people on my team who are experts in certain algorithms that I don't know very much about, or certain cryogenic properties that I don't know very much about. So as long as I know that those resources exist and that they're friendly, nice, interesting people who are happy to answer any of my questions, then I don't feel the pressure to internalize all of that information, because that's too much for one human being to do.
I think somebody's asking a follow-up question on that, Olivia. What are some of the concepts of quantum computing that you still find difficult to understand?
So one thing that like I always struggle with personally is like how people come up with new quantum algorithms, because it's just sort of the opposite end of the spectrum in what I was trained in, which is like how to build the processors and control them. So I have never really like fully grasped how people can write down, you know, some circuits and quantum gates and understand that like a specific outcome will be done faster than like its classical counterpart. That is something that I have never fully internalized. I know it can be done. I know there are really smart people doing it. I sort of understand the algorithms when they're presented to me, but I wouldn't know how to come up with a new quantum algorithm on my own.
So another person on the chat asked that there are fewer students learn quantum computing than classical computing, but there's also fewer jobs in the industry. Would you say that the competition is higher or lower compared to classical software jobs? And is there a compatibility between the two? An easily compatible transition, I would say, between the two fields.
Okay, I'm not sure what about the full-time jobs. Well, if we compare internships, well, I have a ballpark estimate that every opening we have gets 100 more applications than we can actually hire. If we extrapolate this to classical internships in the same company, we have a lot of classical computing interns. It would be hundreds of thousands of people applying for internships. I'm not sure there are that many applications. So I think it might actually be more competitive on some levels. But then for an internship, you don't need to have a lot of background. So for the roles which require a lot of experience, might actually be less competitive because the field is younger. There are just not that many people who has been around forever and have that kind of experience. Unlike classical computing, in which you can find a software developer with 20 years of experience, more than one.
And our last question for the panel. What do you guys find the most exciting in your field, and how do you see the future of quantum computing?
I guess I can start, but I'm really interested to hear what everyone else would say too. For me, the most exciting part about quantum computing is not necessarily what's going to be accomplished in 10 to 15 years from now. It's the fact that we are creating experiments in the lab that can probe quantum physics and let us understand it better than we ever have before. And we're doing it in novel, useful ways, but we don't necessarily have a full picture of what's going on physically, right? So I think that that disconnect, but that ability to make it into something so powerful is what's most interesting. And as for where I see the future going, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't put my money on anything right now. I think we're going to develop some really interesting uses. I think maybe chemistry and material science are the fields that I am most closely looking at right now. But that's not to say that I don't see applications across the board. I think, kind of like what I said in my introduction, the most exciting and interesting end result of quantum computing is something that we haven't even thought of yet.
I can go. I'm very excited about the fact that we can control. There's this chance to control nature, to tap into quantum mechanics and build something that is potentially more powerful than classical computing. And I'm very excited about quantum error correction and the threshold theorem that it can actually suppress physical noise exponentially given the right error correction codes. So I'm looking forward and excited about next year's. Like, multiple groups are focusing on error correction and creating a logical qubit. So I'm very excited about those results and that direction, and see an actual fault-tolerant error-corrected quantum computer. In terms of the future, I'm with Olivia. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm very well aware of the risks that this is, even though very exciting field and has a lot of potentials. And hopefully simulation is going to be one of the use cases. But there's just no clear-cut answer there where this is going to be useful commercially, or will it be useful commercially. However, I think for scientific purposes and simulating and bringing forward quantum physics and understanding large-scale simulations better is going to be useful scientifically. I really hope that we're going to hit that goal at least.
And Maria, what is the most exciting field for you, or part of the field for you?
Prediction is hard, especially about the future. I guess I'm just here for the ride.
That's great. And with that, I just want to thank all of our amazing panelists for their insights today. And thank you all for attending this session. Please stay on the stream. We have another talk coming up from Q Control, and we hope you enjoy it. Bye.